Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history. A look back at a specific day in history, the events of those days, the historical consequences of those events, or historical perspective, whichever is needed. We also take a look at births that occurred on that day, deaths, and sometimes holidays. Please, if you like the videos, hit that subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be notified anytime I post new content, and likewise tell a friend. So let's get to this day in history, January the 28th. And on this day in 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. Christine McAuliffe was on her way to becoming the first U.S. civilian to fly in space. She was a 37-year-old high school social studies teacher from New Hampshire, and she was going to do lessons from space broadcast back to students in the United States. Originally, the Challenger had been scheduled to launch on January 22nd, but a series of problems with weather delayed the launch until the 28th. It was a cold morning in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and engineers working on the shuttle team warned there could be certain equipment on the shuttle that was vulnerable to failure at cold temperatures. However, those warnings were not heeded, and at 11:39, Challenger launched, and problems were immediate. And 73 seconds later, with hundreds of spectators watching on the ground, including Christine's family, and millions watching around the world on television, the shuttle exploded, and it was probably the second largest known tragedy after it happened, I would say after the Kennedy assassination, and probably ranks higher above it. Because with the Kennedy assassination, you got the reports from Dallas, and then, the word that Kennedy was dead. But this was apparent from the moment it happened, and people were watching around the world live on television. And this was going to be a big event for NASA, because at that point, space was kind of waning in everyone's view of how big of a risk it was and the importance of space travel. And this mission was designed to help bring it back to the forefront by launching a civilian into space. They had previously, on the mission before Challenger, had launched a few politicians into space, members of Congress into space, and that was a very important event. It grounded the shuttle program for quite some time. The next launch, let's see, that was STS-51L, and that was, like I said, in January of 86. They would not relaunch until September 29th, 1988, and that would be Space Shuttle Discovery. Besides McAuliffe on the crew, there were six other members of the crew, and they were Commander Francis Scobie. This would have been his second flight. Michael J. Smith would have been the pilot. It would have been his first space flight. On Saki, this would have been his second space flight. He was the mission specialist. Judith A. Rensink, it would have been her second space flight. Ronald E. McNair would have been the third mission specialist. It would have been his second space flight. And the payload specialist was Gregory B. Jarvis, and it would have been his first space flight, and he worked for Hughes Space and Communications. And there was a backup crew. Barbara Morgan would have been the backup to McCullough. And she actually did fly on STS 118 in 19. Let's see when that was. In 2007. So she was the backup to McCullough. President Reagan was scheduled to give his State of the Union that night, and he gave a great speech that night. Probably one of his best. Obviously, if you look at me, I was not alive during the Reagan administration. I was born in the last month of the Reagan administration. But I consider Reagan one of our greatest presidents, and I've watched a lot of his speeches on YouTube, read tremendously on the career and life of Ronald Reagan, and almost everyone considers this one of his best speeches. And it was written by Peggy Noonan, and the line that everyone remembers is his quote, which he borrowed from the poem The Aviator. We'll never forget them, or the last time we saw them, this morning. And when they slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. He also talked about the death that had occurred of Sir Francis Drake on the same day many years before. And he talked about how during Drake's time, the great frontier was the seas. And he died at sea and was buried at sea. And these, in our time, space was the great final frontier. And these people were taking the risk of going to that great beyond. So if you have time, go look up Reagan's speech on the Challenger. It's very short. Go watch it. It's actually shorter than this video. Some births that occurred on this day. Carlos Slim was born in 1940 in Mexico City. He is head of the Carso Group, and he was, from 2010 to 2013, the richest man in the world. He has a net worth of $59.5 billion. He's currently the 8th richest man in the world, as I said. He is the single largest shareholder in the New York Times Company, and he is a self-made businessman. So, currently, the richest man in the world, of course, is Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon. And I think it's interesting that two of the richest men in the world both own newspapers. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, but Bezos owns the Washington Post. Slim owns is the largest shareholder in the New York Times. And they are very hands-off in their dealings with the Times. Obviously, Slim doesn't own the New York Times. He's just the largest shareholder in the New York Times Company. Worded that a little wrong, but from 2010 to 2013, Carlos Slim was the richest man in the world. Now, some deaths that occurred on this day. In 1547, at the Palace of Whitehall, Henry VIII died at 55. And the most likely cause of death was syphilis. Of course, Henry VIII was famous for his many marriages, his belief in divine rights of the king, being the father of the Royal Navy. He was a member of the Tudor dynasty, the second member, and his frustration in his marriages was that none of them could bear him a son. And this led to him going nuts. And he did eventually have a son. And but yes, he executed two of his wives. In the process, led to the separation of the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church, and of course made himself the head of the Church of England. So, because the Pope would not annul his marriage to his first wife. So, we hope you've enjoyed today's video. I'm probably this weekend at some point going to put up my Iowa caucus video. I'm kind of holding off on that because we're in a very fluid situation right now with this impeachment trial. And I just, to be quite frank with you, I'm not sure at this moment on Iowa. I'm still doing a lot of thought and reading. So we will definitely have that video out for you by Sunday, though. So I'll see y'all all tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.